brings it down, empties it, and brings it back up to the garage. And so there was many different variations of that same type of necessity to have a specified service for individuals that that we have to be able to accommodate. And so the more that I've thought about it since the meeting and have had continued either emails or phone calls from people voicing their opinions, and a lot of them say they want to, they want to choose themselves. They want the ability to choose. And so I've started to frame it more in my mind of we need to be able to produce a service that if they then took and laid out their choices, that the vast majority of them would choose this one. It's going to cost less. It's going to have more service features. It's going to give them greater flexibility either for picking up couches, refrigerators, kind of whatever. So more service, less costs, really, it comes down to. And so anyway, those are some of the things that I think are important that we get to. I haven't answered any of the staff's questions, but I'll let Mr. Llanas talk for a little bit.
I think Ms. Juneman said it best in that we do need some information, factual information. In the absence of facts, myth becomes reality. And if we only hear bits and pieces and sound bites and misinformation, then without having factual data in order to refute that, the conversation gets muddled and it gets sidetracked. And so I would reiterate the importance of having some studies that have been done before, as Mr. Nephew talked about, before us to review certainly what other cities have done, their successes, their failures, almost like case studies. Here's an example of City A. This is what their issues were. This is what they've seen. I think that process would be incredibly important. In this thing, this has become such an emotional piece for so many people, and that to me is a little unsettling. And that we have heard from a number of anti-organized folk and a handful of pro. And I think they summarize themselves into 5 big objections, as the mayor alluded to. Big government, whatever that means to certain people. Freedom of enterprise, being afraid of the little guy being squashed. Details like Xmas trees and snowbirds and less use residents. What do they do? Can they be afforded different rates? And then certainly the last one, if it's not broken, then why are we even having this conversation? To some people, it's fine. Why go there? And to me, I would say, I hate the idea, or I resent the notion that because there is a special interest group who has the money to combat the thought of it, that we ought to be afraid of it and not even have the conversation. And I take great exception to the idea that certain people think that they can scare people with misinformation so that they're not getting the facts. We're talking about having a conversation. We're not even saying, hey, we think this is a good idea, let's go forward. We're saying, hey, well, we think this is a good idea enough to have a conversation. And we're not even having a conversation because we're afraid of what people are going to say to us, or they get 100,000 emails, whatever we got. And I think it's the wrong way to govern. It's the wrong way to listen to a collective group of people. We've heard from a number of people, and I respect every single one of those opinions. For the record, I'm 50-50. I literally just don't have enough information to make a decision one way or the other about the end vote. But I'm 100% committed to the idea that we ought to have that conversation. I mean, to think that some people who have far more funds than the city does to go out and touch every single resident to not even have the conversation, I think is a bad way to govern. And so for me, we have plenty to do. We don't want to be in the garbage business. That's not what we're doing in terms of big government. We're talking about, is there a meaningful impact? Is there a benefit to our residents? We haven't answered that question for ourselves yet. I haven't answered that for myself. And I would say the freedom of enterprise is exactly what we're trying to do. We are exactly trying to say collective and purchasing power increases when you have a larger group of like-minded consumers who are requiring these basic fundamentals at a certain rate. And I think, in summary, I would say, unless we can do it better and cheaper, that I would have a hard time voting for it. Emotionally, I see the big picture. I see, well, of course it makes sense, right? A, B, C, D, E, and F. But I don't have that. I don't have that exact data that I need to make the decision. So I would say we ought to have the conversation. We ought to press forward to keep investigating this. You don't always do what's popular. You do what's right. And if it's right that we eventually put this to a vote before the council, then fantastic. But to not do it because we're afraid of pissing some people off kind of is the wrong way to do it.
Ms. Juneman.
Okay, so I would be in favor of staff doing some looking into this. I don't see any point in having a consultant at this point. I think they can gather information. There's a lot of it around, as Mr. Nephew alluded, and there are neighboring cities that have done it, so they have their lessons learned that we should be able to benefit from, at least as a starting point for a civilized conversation we might learn something about. I think we need the basic facts of cost and how they went about it, and talking to people in other cities that have this, and I talked to two different people, city attorneys from other places, who said the whole secret is the contract, which is kind of logical if you think about it. It lists out the services so that the things that we've heard about that people really want and need will be there, and it doesn't matter if it's hauler A, B, C, D, or F, they're going to be there. So if you can get those things, and that's the part that is most appealing to me, having looked at this many times in the last 20-some years. The most appealing part is being able to get the services that people really want and get the price down for everyone. If that in fact is what can happen, we'd be foolish to let it go, especially without at least investigating it and having an informed conversation. And right now, we're not informed enough. So I think we need information through staff on costs and on other conditions that other cities have found helpful, things that just don't work. We will have to do an education piece on what we're doing. And again, I would like to reiterate in that why we're doing this to begin with. And I would appreciate if maybe staff could bring back to us how or why the environmental committee made this a goal. We need some of their rationalization of this because we rely on them for environmental input. So if they made this a goal, they have reasons. And in order for us to adopt their reasons at all, we'd have to know what they are. So I think it would be, for us to know that as well, would be helpful in the whole information gathering piece. But I'm with Mr. Llanas. We have to look at it. And to say we're not going to have a conversation because people spoke up based on misinformation is not a good way to go about anything that affects everybody in the city. That doesn't make any sense.
Mr. Nephew?
There's something deviously clever about the way the organized hauling statute is written, which is that it seems really designed to, and the trash lobby has been very effective in exploiting this. It seems designed to insert as much controversy before there's anything that you can really nail down as specific. And so, for example, you'll have one argument against organized collection to be that people assume that if government has any involvement in something, that it's going to increase the cost. So they say, well, we should oppose this because we can know ahead of time that it's going to increase the cost. On the other hand, you'll have a group of people arguing that what's going to happen is that small haulers who don't have the market strength of a bigger company are going to not be able to offer the best price, And so they'll lose out, and their jobs will vanish, and so forth. And obviously, if you require fewer people to do the work because it's being done more efficiently, then you should expect that less people are going to be employed if you only have to send one truck down a street instead of 6. So what you have, in essence, are two arguments that are completely contradictory, because the one argument says we have to oppose this because it's going to increase the cost. And the other argument says we have to oppose this because it's going to decrease the cost. Well, they can't both be right. You can't be saying both that it's going to drive up costs and that's why we have to oppose it, and we have to protect the small businesses because we can't let them have their costs driven down by having so much more competition. But as long as you don't have a specific plan that can really be analyzed, then people that have completely different motivations and interests can both think that they're stridently opposed to a vague, amorphous, shadowy danger that's lurking off in the distance. And so where I really agree with my colleagues, Mr. Llanas and Ms. Juniman, and also Will spoke to this, is that we need to have something pretty specific in front of us to really know how we're going to vote. My sense that organized collection is a good idea doesn't mean I'd vote for any old organized collection plan. It's that I see a path to plans that could offer us rates as low as some people pay in neighboring cities for the level of service that our residents require, and actually probably a higher level of service. And when we have other public interests, for example, in reducing the level of waste production in our city and increasing recycling, we could have a tool to both help residents and magnify that. There are some cities, I don't know if there are any in the metro area, but I believe St. Cloud has what they call a pay-as-you-throw type method, where, you know, if you only need one trash bag a month, that's all you actually pay for. And you buy the bag, and it includes the pickup service along with it, and you just leave it out in the street. The crew picks it up. There are alternatives like that we could look at. There are some cities currently, Maplewood has its ordinance, which in compliance with the Waste Management Act, we require that each household have a contract with a waste hauler. Actually, the Waste Management Act allows us to have an out if they have an alternative that is responsible for their disposal. And so I was looking, for example, at Little Canada and their program, and they have a deal where if you're a small business owner that owns or leases space where you have sufficient dumpster capacity at your business, then you can get an exemption from their organized hauling system because you have that alternate disposal program, provided that your business is close enough that it's practical for you to do that. If you own a warehouse in Texas or something, obviously that's not really going to do it. Similarly, some residents have spoken to me about ideas of how they maybe currently share a dustbin amongst several households of seniors who have very low waste production and do quite a lot of recycling. Well, it seems to me that we should look at a plan that could facilitate that could encourage neighbors to come together and to do that, and to therefore achieve some of the big overall goals, which I think was motivating the MPCA in looking at their study, which is to reduce the amount of trash that's being made in the Twin Cities. And so anyway, these are some things that, just to add on to some of Will's thoughts about how the program can be structured. But the overall thing is that I think we really need to be getting into the specifics, and the sooner the better, because if we focus on those specifics, then we can come up with a determination of whether or not it's possible to make a plan that is compelling and something that we'd be willing to pass as a council. And so my hesitancy of any of the other things is to not want to get sidetracked into restudying the same things that have been studied over and over again. And so my own sense would be that I'd like us to get right into the details of what is it that we would want from a plan. And I don't know if that needs to come before or after a resolution of intent to organize, but I'd like to get focused on those particular details and whether and how it's possible to do them sooner rather than later. Because I think that if we get our pause on those kinds of things, that's going to give residents a much better idea rather than the shadowy boogeyman that's hanging off under the eaves somewhere, threatening to bust into their homes and determine what happens to their trash.
So I have a question I want to ask staff before I get back to there. In our